Alright, I'm hoping this makes a second live video and doesn't make a continuation of my existing video because that would suck. I'm trying to make two separate videos here. But like I said, as I said, I'm very new to the YouTube live streaming game. Smoking my pipe. Um, I mostly stream on Twitch and video games and fun stuff like that. I really hate talking about politics. I used to talk about politics a lot. Um, but then I kind of got to a point where I couldn't talk politics anymore because everybody likes to talk about politics, but very few people have an understanding of politics. And it makes it difficult to talk politics with anybody because everybody ends up hating you because they don't understand what I'm saying. So, or they end up hating me because they don't understand what I'm saying. So, 2015, I kind of gave up on the whole thing and became apolitical. And I try not to talk about politics, but I kind of sometimes I have to because elsewise I'm just gonna go crazy. So, all right. So this thing happened over the weekend. A lot of things happened over the weekend. This is probably under the rug now that the whole bomb threat scare thing is happening now. I think that's the main story. But George Takai posted the Trump administration is trying to make trans people disappear by defining gender as only male and female determined by genitalia at birth. This is egregious, callous attack on the LGBT community and sends a clear message of the November 6th that there is no place for hate in America. Oh, no, send a clear. It doesn't send a clear. Send a clear message on November 6th that there is no place for hate in America. Well, there's a lot of hate in America, both on the left and the right. But I kept seeing this blasted all over Twitter and Facebook, and I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Because I really couldn't believe that the Trump administration or any administration was trying to make trans people disappear, okay, by defining gender as only male and female determined by genitalia at birth. This this whole statement makes no sense on any level of anybody who understands sex or gender or anything. Okay, it's just like it's completely baffling that anybody could have this position. So I asked for a fact check, right? And Daniel Delisle, I haven't met her in real life, so I might be pronouncing her name wrong, but she sometimes comments on my Twitter, and she's very helpful. Oops. And she posted this New York Times article, and she said this was the reason why everybody was upset. So transgenders could be defined out of existence under Trump administration. Um, the Trump administration is considering a legal definition of gender as immutable and fixed at birth. I'm like, okay. So I read the article, and let me tell you something. This article is very, very, very long, and almost none of it talks about this title here. Transgender could be defined out of existence under the Trump administration. There is like literally in this entire long article that has anything to support that statement, like nothing at all. And the New York Times, I believe, is not complete idiots, so they must understand that people aren't actually reading the article, they're just seeing the headline and they're sharing it, right? Because anybody who would read this, right, it talks about The Department of Health and Human Services is spearheading an effort to establish a legal definition of sex under Title IX. Okay, well, there should be a legal definition of sex under Title IX. Like, law is based on definitions. Law, the United States law is essentially English. Okay, it's English sentences, and they're based on legal definitions, which you can look up most of those in Black's Law. But if they're not in Black's Law, then they go to the dictionary, and if multiple dictionaries have multiple definitions, then there is no legal definition, and therefore it's subject to whatever, right? And it could, whatever it becomes subjective. Law becomes subjective instead of objective, and law needs to be objective, right, in order to be law. Elsewise, it's like the cops can make up whatever they want and say, okay, you're under arrest now because I feel like it. Okay, we can't have that. That's bad. The federal civil rights Title IX, if you don't know, is the federal civil rights law that bans gender discrimination in education programs, only education programs that receive government financial assistance. Okay, so this is only apparently only in regards to Title IX education discrimination. Okay. Now, if you scroll all the way down, so all this is spurned by a memo written by someone, doesn't say who, in the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, the HHS or the DHHS, depending on how you want to abbreviate it. And so they're drafting a memo. They haven't finished drafting it yet. It's not complete. They didn't send it to the Justice Department, which is where it would go once it's finished being written. And so the New York Times contacted the Justice Department, and the Justice Department said, "Well, we can't comment on it because we haven't read it. We haven't seen it. It hasn't come to us yet. So we can't make any comment on it, right? So there's no comment from the Justice Department. There's no comment from the DHHS on it. The memo wasn't publicly released. It doesn't say how the New York Times got a hold of it. The New York Times hasn't published the memo or a copy of the memo, so that we can't read it for ourselves. We're only going on the word of the New York Times about what's in it. Okay, and they only have a brief quote here. Let's see if I can find it. I had it linked up, but I wanted to show how long this article is. It should be right here. All right. Okay, in their memo, Health and Human Services officials wrote that courts and plaintiffs are racing to get decisions. Okay. Ahead of any rulemaking because of the lack of a standalone definition. Now, normally when you have a law, the first section of any law is definitions. So you have the definitions of words so that you know what it is exactly the law is talking about when it says these. Now, these don't exist. And so they want to create a legal definition. Now, it doesn't say, they don't quote the memo saying what they think that legal definition should be. Okay, that's purely, as far as I can tell, speculation on the part of the New York Times. Okay, here's the other part that's quoted from the memo. Courts in the previous administration took advantage of this circumstance. Okay, Courts in the previous administration, that's Obama administration, took advantage of this circumstance to include gender identity and sexual orientation in a multitude of agencies and under a multitude of laws. Okay, so basically they had a subjective position that said that sex under Title IX includes gender identity and sexual orientation. The memo states doing so led to confusion and negative policy consequences in healthcare, education, and other federal contexts. Okay. All right. So basically, the memo said because what I just said at the beginning, because it's subjective and not objective in its definition, okay, it caused confusion and negative policy consequences. Okay, i.e., it's making life hell for everybody in the bureaucracy that runs our country because they don't know what's right and what's wrong. Okay, and they can't come to any agreement or any standardization as to what that is. That's it. As far as we know, that's all the memo said. Didn't say anything about defining it as birth, sex, or any of this other stuff, okay? That's all. It just says it's confusing and it needs to be standardized, okay? That's it. Now, a couple days later, New York Times puts out this other article, and I think this is much more telling than that first article. 2 weeks before midterms, transgendered people feel like pawns. What? They really? They feel like political pawns? You don't say. I'm not surprised, right? Basically, what we have here is stuff like George Takei here, where the left is using trans people as a shield, as a political shield, and that's really not cool. I mean, like, think about it. All right, if transgendered people feel like they're being pawns, who's using them as pawns? Okay, is the Trump administration using them as pawns? I don't think so, because think about that logically from a political standpoint. From a little political standpoint, in what what advantage would it give Republicans to treat transgendered people like dirt right before the midterms? Think about that. Why would they do that? All right. What would be their political advantages? Do they think there's some voter out there who's like, you know, I really agree with them Republicans and their policies, but they don't pick on them queers enough. I can't vote for them unless they pick on them queers some more. No, there's nobody out there. There's nobody out there saying that. It's not the right or the Republicans or whatever you want to call them, conservatives. They're not the ones who are using the trans people as pawns. It's the left. It's the left that are using the trans people as pawns. And I think that's really crappy, all right? So now let's just get into a little bit about the history, all right? Let's take a look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is our most major civil rights piece of legislation on the books, on the records. This is our number one law here, okay? It has a lot of sections. Title 1, barred unequal application of voter registration requirements, okay? This is it right here, right? This is just this one little line. Barred unequal application of voter registration requirements. That means that you can't have one set of voter registration requirements for white people and one another set for black people and another set for Asian people. You can't have one set for males and one set for females and another set for transgenders. You have to have one voter registration requirement set for all people. Okay. And it says here, Title I did not eliminate literacy tests or other black, other, what do they call them, Jim Crow laws to exclude black voters and poor whites in the South. Okay, that was taken care of later in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a year later. Okay, so that laid it very simply. If you're an adult, if you're a citizen, and you live in the I forget what they call them, the zone, the voting zone, um, district. You live in the voting district, then you have the right to vote. Okay, very basic. Title II outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, or national origin in hotels, motels, restaurants, theaters, and public accommodations engaged in interstate commerce. Okay, so in other words, you can't under Title II of the Civil Rights Act, you can't kick someone out of your McDonald's for being black, okay, or Pakistani or whatever. You can, however, if you're under Title II, if you are a local restaurant, then you are, if you only have that one restaurant in that one city, then under federal law, you can do whatever you want. You can say no Irish or dogs allowed, but there's probably local laws that would prevent that sort of discrimination as well. Title III prohibited states and municipal governments from denying access to public facilities on grounds of race, color, religion, or national origin. Okay. Now, notice something you're not seeing here. You're not seeing anything about sex or gender. So far, we haven't seen anything about sex or gender. This is a thing. Under federal law, discrimination by sex is mostly still legal. Okay. Encourage the desegregation of public schools and and authorize the U.S. Attorney General to file suits to enforce. Okay, so the federal government can sue local governments for failing to enforce this. The Civil Rights Commission, so a special group to investigate. Title VI, prevent discrimination by government agencies that receive federal funds. So if you have any of these discriminations and you are funded by the government, you can lose your funding. Okay. Title VII. This one, we're getting a little bit bigger. Now, this is Wikipedia, so it's showing some of the examples. Okay. Title 7 of the Act, codified in subchapter 6 of chapter 21 of Title 42 of the United States Code, prohibits discrimination by covered employers on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Okay, this is probably the most important one right here. Okay, so this is a labor law. Okay, this says that an employer cannot discriminate. This is the first time sex is mentioned too, okay, and religion. All right, so an employer cannot discriminate on employees on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And this was a very, very big thing in the 60s, okay? Like, we talk about this wage gap today, which for the most part is, most people don't even think it's real. A lot of people think it has to do with life choices or blah, 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 whatever. Okay, that's an organic thing that happened. Okay, so either just for whatever reason, just by coincidence, men and women are getting paid differently on the books anyway. I think once you start figuring in tips and other undeclared income, it evens out a lot more. But um, back in the 60s, prior to this Civil Rights Act, it was 100% legal to say, you know, men get one pay, women get another pay. Blacks get one pay, white gets another pay. So it used to be like, a woman, their starting wage at a company would be $1.25 because they were doing women's work, okay? And then a black man would get like his starting wages would be like $1.60 because he was doing men's work. Although he was black, he was doing, he was not getting paid the same as a white male starting wage, which would have been like $2.25 or whatever. Because literally they had what they used to call women's work and black work and white men's work, and they paid different starting wages. Now that doesn't mean that a black man could eventually rise up to become a foreman of the dock or whatever and get paid more than a white worker who was a lower ranked employee than he was. You could still have equality through merit, but the base starting wages were set based on their sex and their race, and that was fucked up. There's no doubt about it. That was fucked up bullshit, and most people agreed that was fucked up bullshit. Although I'm sure there was plenty of men who were happy with it. In regards to religion, when my grandfather was an accountant, okay, and when he graduated college, there was law there because he was a Catholic Italian. There was accounting firms he could not work for. Okay, there was Protestant accounting firms. He could not work for the Protestant accounting firm because he was not a Protestant. He could not work for the Jewish accounting firm because he was not Jewish. Okay, my grandfather had to go and work at the Italian law firm, not law firm, the Italian accounting firm because he was Italian, and that was the end of the story, right? And it was the Jewish companies hired the Jewish accounting firm, and the Protestant companies hired the Protestant accounting firm, and the Italians. Well, they picked up what they could, and they did well. They did well. There was plenty of people willing to hire them because they were good at their jobs. But that was what life was back in the 60s, and like a lot of people today don't understand this. They don't understand what real discrimination looks like. It Even myself, I can only imagine it, but I know enough about history. I talk to enough older people that I get a good sense of it. But a lot of people today have no idea. Okay, so then we get into Title 8. All right, required compilation of voter registration data. So basically saying collect data on who's voting where. Title 9 made it easy, and this is different than the education Title 9. We'll get to that in a second. Title 9 made it clear, it made it easier to move civil rights cases from state to federal court. So, i.e., it would fast track. This is fast tracking. So, if you were getting screwed over on by your local government, you could fast track it to the federal court. Okay. Title 10, establishment of community relation services tasked with assisting community disputes involving claims of discrimination. So basically, these are your bureaucrats the people who look at the cases, talk to you on the phone. Title 11 gives defendant accused in certain categories of criminal contempt in matters arising from not. So basically, it's saying that Title 11 is that somebody violated one of these other previous titles, and therefore they can be held in contempt of court and fined up to $1,000 or imprisoned for not more than 6 months. Okay, so that's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the most important civil rights pieces of legislation we ever had, and it only provides grounds for discrimination against sex in the workplace. That's the only place in which sex is a respected right federally. Okay, and that's the way it was until we had the Education Amendment of 1972, in which those discriminations were then extended to education, specifically education that receives public funding. Okay, and specifically Title 9 of the Education Amendments of 1972 is what allows that. This all the other stuff has to do with other things. Title 9 has to do with discrimination. Okay, so anyway, that's an ongoing thing. Title 9 is in what we've been seeing on college campuses, and I certainly saw this when I was in college recently, is that Title 9 has become a sword, a political sword, and it's mostly wielded by the left, but now it's flipped. So now it's the right is now using it to say that programs that specifically are for women and for blacks or other minorities are discriminatory, and making an unfair advantage. Understand the thing that people need to understand, and I think a lot of people miss this about civil rights. A civil right is a right that is afforded to all persons equally, okay? But it is a right to opportunity. It's not a right to outcome. So if you have a program that's designed, it doesn't matter who it's trying to prop up, whether it's a minority group, whether it's a religious group, whether it's a male, female, transgender, it doesn't matter. If it excludes anybody, anyone at all, it's discriminatory, okay? And so when you have these civil rights, and I'm all for them. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's all go equal opportunity. I love that concept. But it will hurt a lot of people, okay? Especially women. The number one party, not political party, but just group in the United States that will get hurt if we continue to push the civil rights of discrimination on the grounds of sex. And as like I said, you'll see in here that sex is almost not listed anywhere, at all under the Civil Rights Act, because with the exception of employment, right? Okay, so if we had civil rights, if we had anti-discrimination laws based on gender, it means that you can no longer have segregated bathrooms. There's no male or female bathrooms anymore. There's just bathrooms, okay? So that's out. All the dudes are gonna hear you pooping, ladies. That's right. If you want civil rights, that's one of the things that you're gonna get, is you're gonna get guys listen to you poop in the bathroom. All right. The other thing that you're gonna have is all of these programs in the federal government, and on the state levels as well, that are designed to assist women will be discriminatory, and they'll either have to be disbanded or they'll have to be inclusive. That's the two choices. So that means that, the women's education program will no longer be the women's education program. It'll just be the education program, which I think is good, but I don't think a lot of women realize that this is what's going to happen. There will no longer be a women's education program. There will no longer the government will no longer be able to put things like the I don't know the exact name of it, but it's the women's what was it? The Protect Women from Violence Act or amendment or whatever. That would be disbarred. That would be considered discriminatory. The housing, women's housing, right? Public assisted housing, gone. That's not gone. It's either gone or it's for everybody. It's no longer for women. Men and women would have equal opportunity to use those programs, which I think would be great, because there are a lot of men who are homeless and can't get housing because there is most of the programs that are set up to deal with homelessness are for women and minorities. So I think that would be good, but I don't think a lot of women and feminists particularly would be happy with those programs no longer being exclusive to them. There's the way we handle family law would have to completely change in this country. We'd have to see equal representation for both mothers and fathers. We would have to see we would see changes in the prison system. There would no longer be women's prisons and men's prisons. There would just be prisons with both women and men in them. There's a lot of things that would change in this country, and this is the reason why there is no federal law barring sexual discrimination. Okay, because sexual discrimination is very important, especially to people on the left. Okay, and that's why you don't ever see anybody from the left ever trying to push for anti-discrimination against sex. You never see it. You hear them whine and complain about it on the news, right? You hear about it in the New York Times. Okay, you hear about it in the New York Times. What you don't see is anybody on the left or the right, for that matter, but probably every now and then you see someone on the right trying to propose it, but you never ever see anybody on the left trying to propose anti-discrimination based on sex at the federal level. Never. It doesn't happen, because they know they would be screwed. A lot of these programs that they like and support would be disqualified under fair civil rights treatment for both men and women. And this is really important. I hope I've driven that home to you now. I hope you understand this, and how I'm all for it. If I was in the House of Representatives or a senator, that would be probably the number one pieces of legislation I would be trying to pass, is this anti-sex discrimination laws, and gender. Yeah, I don't care. I don't care what gender you are. That's not important. So yeah, I would say sex, gender discrimination. Definitely, we need a federal law barring it, but understand that in doing so, we are going to have major changes in this country. I think there'll be good changes, but I think a lot of people are going to be unhappy about them, which is why it hasn't happened all the way now into 2018, 54 years after the passing of the Civil Rights Act. We still don't have an anti-sexual discrimination law in the United States. And I think we need one. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. And as always, remember, getting angry doesn't help. You got to think about the situation and come up with a real solution. So cheers.